Good morning, afternoon, and evening to all of our listeners wherever you are in the world. Welcome to another episode of the Cut the Carbon podcast. We're your link to climate advocates from across the globe, here to let them tell their own stories on fighting the climate crisis. We talk to our guests about climate matters that matter to them and how their countries are cutting carbon emissions. I'm your host, Patricia Manarang. For our episode today, we have John Paul Jose from India. John is here to talk about climate activism in India. Let's hear a snippet from this episode.
For India, we don't have to change the behavior of people in many forms because life itself is in a way sustainable. But we need more of a behavioral change in the industries and development.
If you'd like to support this podcast and cut the carbon, don't forget to subscribe to our channels and follow us on our socials, which can be found in the description. This interview has been edited for clarity purposes. Some audio issues may arise due to connectivity problems. Hello, John. Thank you so much for agreeing to guest on our podcast. Before we start, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us what you've been doing recently?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to this podcast. And it's great to share my insights on climate change and related aspects. And myself, John Paul Jose. I am from India, but I'm currently based in Belgium. I am doing a master's in sustainable development. And I also work on different projects and initiatives. And one of the recent one I'm working on is we have making a network or a collective which works on promoting citizen science. So we share the stories and also collect information on how communities cope up with climate change and how they adapt to climate change locally and how we could take this knowledge to support them in different ways by mobilizing resources and other mechanisms the people have at the global level. And excited and looking forward to a great conversation.
I'm looking forward to a great conversation too. So let's first start by contextualizing climate change. We know it's a global issue that affects everyone, but its effects could manifest differently depending on your geographical location. What are the specific impacts of climate change on India? Do you think there's anything happening recently that hasn't happened before?
I would say it's 2013 that's considered like a major way in which we began to see the impact of climate change in India. Because initially it was the droughts which has become prevalent, like an extreme rainfall, so extreme heat leading to drought. That led to major impact on farming communities. Agriculture is the backbone of India, and such a large population involved in ensuring everyone is fed well and ensuring that we don't stay hungry, and also at the same time protecting the environment. So this impact has been a turning point in how farmers have to deal with such crisis. And since then, there have been recurring event of either drought or floods. But in 2018, there was one of the biggest flood which we have never witnessed. We call it the flood of the century because it was devastating. A lot of people died, and more than half of 75% of India was during this period at different point got flooded. Such a large country and also still developing, it's very difficult to have a team that's going everywhere and saving people because it needs a lot of resources and also highly advanced technologies and everything to monitor the situations and ensure people are safe even before the crisis happens. This is a difficult situations where you have to know which areas are going to be most affected. In general, India is considered one of the most vulnerable countries in the world, but within India there are different regions that is categorized district wise, regional wise. But if you go further narrow down on the ground, we don't know within that place which all areas are highly impacted. So due to this lack of knowledge, the impact of climate change is much more worse because we continuously develop those regions, live in those regions, but we don't know is it a point in which we shouldn't develop this part of India, but we can develop other parts of India. I would say this paradox is one of the biggest issue than the climate change in general, because the impact of climate change is very much high, but the issue is how we deal with climate change and how it's impact. That is the most challenging factor, not just climate change in general, but how it is impacting people and how people are coping up with, and also the government, how they are doing to address this crisis.
So extreme rainfall leading to floods and extreme heat leading to droughts are some climate change impacts that India experiences. You also mentioned that there are different regions and districts within India, and some might be more heavily impacted by weather events. I agree that how we deal and cope with climate change is an extremely complex issue. Saying that, I'm curious about what Indians are thinking in regards to climate change. What is the state of climate advocacy in India? Do they have any focus areas or certain activities they like to do?
In India, climate advocacy is mostly done by youth in the form of education, like supporting people with resources to know what is climate change, how it's impacting the country, and also at the global level. Also within the universities, there are like different programs, seminars, workshops, also the digital campaigns and everything that educate people on climate change. But as a country as a whole, I would say it's mostly environmental activism because the climate activism is not driven by the knowledge of climate science, but rather the impact of climate change on the environment and on the livelihoods. That leads people to do something to be resilient, to adapt to climate change or to mitigate. That initially comes from farmers, but also companies or other like experts recognize these efforts and provide support financially or like use of technology. So we say more environmental action from people than climate actions. One example I would say is like restoration of lakes, preserve water in cities, and cleaning up rivers and planting trees. And these are the common community initiatives that's being done. But there are also like industrial level projects or initiatives, even from the government, like promotion of solar, because with the Greenpeace, like NGOs and other NGOs work with the communities on the ground and also inspire governments to invite collaborations, working on organic agriculture or solar power plants. There's a few examples in which community-driven activities are done around climate actions. So it's not just advocacy, but advocacy also transition to some actions by involving the community. But it's mostly done by the existing community collectives and also in partnership with other NGOs and other well-wishers.
I want to highlight something interesting that you said. Climate action is not driven by climate science, but rather the impacts of climate change. That's a statement that I agree with. In most countries, seeing the disastrous effects of climate change triggers climate action. So climate advocacy in India is usually youth-led, and it's good that it transitions to climate action. Does the government support the youth in becoming environmental activists? What about society in general?
There is no encouragement for disruptive activism because like I said, developing country, large number of activists forming in the development work or the agendas of the government or the companies would actually inflict a lot of loss upon people as well, those who work on these companies or other aspects, because transition is very difficult in such a populous developing country because you cannot transition overnight. It can only happen like in a very gradual way. But at the same time, we need every best possible ways to make this transition happen very fast and smooth. So that's why we need like more just transition, but we need like more resources because it's very difficult to take into account such a large country to immediately decarbonize itself in a very short period of time. Governments also support engaging these activists, especially in conversations, and it depends upon two ways, like if you would like to continue your advocacy or if you want to join the government in their initiatives and actions. It's not the youth saying we have to do it and the government accept it and integrate youth into activism or advocacy, but rather government have their own trajectory and you could join it to find a space where you can be climate action advocate, because you work with the government to focus on the climate action. But other than that, there is less space, I would say, because the same people who are climate activists who are also experts in different fields. There are engineers, there are social scientists. They could actually be used in different ways, even by the government if they wish to, because climate activists also come from those who realize the impact of climate change from their education itself, and they need to use their education somewhere to aid decarbonization or mitigating the impact of climate change, supporting all the actions. And there is a need for larger platforms, not just from the government, also from companies or also from NGOs, other groups. You have to integrate voices of the youth. It's not just the youth, but I would say like more like technical experts, as many of them are.
So the government engages in dialogues with the youth on climate matters and also asks them to join their initiatives. What other specific steps is India's government taking to address climate change, specifically to reduce carbon emissions?
One of the initiatives that was recently launched was like Life, or like Lifestyle for Environment. So India is one of the most sustainable country because It's only the industrialization that is not sustainable because we never knew like developing this will lead to climate change and also lead to climate crisis. But we continue to develop in that form, and now we have the knowledge, and now we are like changing the industries and our activities. But we also see as Indian culture or the way of living, it's mostly sustainable. People walk or like cycle and go to different places, especially in rural areas. And it's mostly a country is vegetarian and doesn't have a lot of industrial animal products or like processing, and all the lifestyle itself is like less carbon emissions is very low per capita. And so this is an initiative to drive international collaboration, how we could take lessons from the sustainable lifestyle and exchange this knowledge at global level to support global decarbonization. This is mostly associated with behavioral change because that's something which many countries are doing. And for India, we don't have to change the behavior of people in many forms because life itself is in a way sustainable. But we need more of a behavioral change in the industries and development. And for that, there is also the renewable energy projects, which government is doing in a drastic way. Wind and solar is one of the major focus, but in recent years, there's also a focus on hydrogen. And think one of the first hydrogen-powered trains are also in the making. Also, the nuclear energy. One of the recent like engagement with France is to purchase nuclear technologies and everything. Also, France is also recycling nuclear energies. So this could also provide more opportunities in the decarbonization. Lastly, there is a project called Lead It, which initiated by government of India and Sweden, which support decarbonization in core industries like steel and other like iron, other industries. It also have other companies and other countries involved mobilize all their resources and capacities and knowledge to promote the decarbonization in these industries, because it also provides a lot of opportunities to reduce our emissions. But like I said before, the energy is one of the major focus, shifting to renewable energy because such a large population still relying on fossil fuels. It's a difficult way ahead. There are different ways in which mixing biomass with coal to reduce emissions and purchasing good quality coal and other use of biofuels, coal gasifications. So, but this is within the fossil fuel sector. It's not like a complete blanket ban on the use of fossil fuels, but still using fossil fuels, but reducing the emissions by improving quality in fossil fuel usage.
You mentioned some government initiatives such as Lifestyle for the Environment, which has an interesting concept behind it. Lifestyle choices and the culture of Indians are rather sustainable due to eating or transport choices. It's the industry that needs to change and adapt. You also mentioned renewable energy and decarbonization projects. Do you think these plans are enough? Do you have any suggestions or recommendations for the government to improve their plans?
These are mostly done in collaboration with government to government and industry to industry, and their troika partnership with other actors within the development agenda. But I would say they can also extend to agriculture sector and other areas, because when we decarbonize, we also have to look into how, because within the decarbonization, we also have to live in 1.5 degree climate change. So how decarbonization also benefit people to live within a new climate, especially farmers, are a major part of the country, and also supporting food security across the country. If people become poor or lose their capacity to feed themselves, it's like a big tragedy. It's difficult to manage. So this is one of the areas they could work on, like decarbonizing country as a whole, including agriculture, but also supporting how this agriculture sector or the people could benefit from it in a larger scale, not just industries or global commitments or NDCs meeting the targets, but other how people also meet their day-to-day targets, improving their standard of living or lifestyle. And another I would also say is to bring new voices or like diversity, because people from different countries or regions have different imaginations, knowledge, and education adds to it, and it gives a different perspective. So 10 diverse people in the team, not based on the diversities, and where they come from, but diversity of knowledge influenced by where they come from and how they have added value to their own perspective. It's very important to have such a diverse team. They can think differently, so they can see what is the government missing. There are a lot of missing areas which government could actually decarbonize in a faster way, ensure this transition, but still become economically developed. So these missing areas could be realized and work together to move forward.
Extending projects to the agriculture sector, improving the standard of living, and having more diverse perspectives are your suggestions for India to improve their carbon emission reduction plans. You mentioned earlier that the youth leads climate action. Would you say that Indian civil society as a whole is active? What would you suggest for people who want to become more active in climate advocacy?
It's difficult to ask such, poor people to be responsible for climate change because it's a difficult choice. People don't have a privilege to be a climate actor or like sacrifice things because there is nothing to sacrifice, first of all, and there is no comfort zones for such people. So it's very difficult to ask people to engage in climate action, do some changes, such way people can be supported in this transition. It's more important to support than be advocate or like dictating people to do this. Like you ban plastic and then you say people not to use plastic, but you have to also give them an alternative. Many people, especially people work in the agriculture sector, people carry their belongings or like phone, food, everything in plastic bags, and they keep it in the field itself. And if it rains, it doesn't go bad, doesn't get affected. And when the rain is over, when they go back home, sometimes people leave it behind. It's a very common thing. Another is like a flood happens in one area and people have to move to another area and they go back to the same place because their livelihood, income, and everything is from that land. People cannot imagine another future out of it. Many are not that educated and many are not financially or in other forms doesn't have that enough resources to transition. Always a support is needed for civil society. There are civil society organizations, those are capable to support those needs. It's for them to identify who are in need and support them in different ways. Also like communicating the issues and the challenges in those communities. If you are a civil society organization that's highly involved in communities, you know different issues being that people are being challenged with and how they cope up with it and what kind of help they need. They can communicate this with the government and seek support. If we confront the government, it's a very difficult thing. It's mostly about running out of time. So you have to think amicably and bring solutions and ideas and initiatives that strategically help people, but also involve government and companies without completely like denying the role they could play. Because they might not be transitioning enough, or they might not be completely missing out or moving away from fossil fuels, but we also need them. Power and resources come from the industries and the government, not from the communities. Communities have only the mobilizing power. If it's not heard, they have to live up with the everyday reality facing such a crisis. People continue to do like normal initiatives like planting trees, clean up drives, and sharing the knowledge of climate change and be aware of themselves. They cannot go beyond the next level, engage in high-level technological interventions or high-level conservation initiatives because of the resources needed. They have to make a commitment outside their day-to-day life. Very difficult. Day-to-day life is mostly aligned with a livelihood that they have to rely on nature for the income, which in turn also supports their family, education, health, and everything. And going outside this is difficult because it's not 9 to 5 or like 5 days a week work schedule. You have to be vigilant with every situation because you have a unfenced crop, unfenced livestock, other assets on the ground, and you have to be vigilant during rain, vigilant during any crisis with wild animals. So it's a difficult way of life, and privilege depends upon how you could afford to engage in climate advocacy and actions.
I've raised this before with some of our previous guests, but it's true that in developing countries, climate activism can be seen as a privilege. It's important that governments initiate and implement climate-related policies while keeping in mind their people, what's important for them, and how to improve their lives. Before we end, John, would you like to promote any groups or organizations to our listeners?
So the one I mentioned initially, we have a Escape network. We are working on by understanding how communities are coping up with climate change and how they are adapting to it and how we could as an industry or as a government or as influencers or even normal people, how you could support them. So we are trying to platform the citizen science and knowledge through by creating a platform that supports them in different ways. And this information is also key to drive scientific research and policy development. So we are working on creating this platform, but we also, like I said, we need to share resources. So we need finance to execute the project and also other technical resources and networks to connect more people and build collaborations and partnership. And also people can also work with volunteer or be part of this initiative as we grow further, because we also need ideas, because we also have like limits in our thinking capacity, because we cannot think beyond what we envision. But if we see more people coming in and contributing, they can also be part of this journey. Yeah.
Thank you so much, John, for shedding some light on India and climate change.
Thank you so much. It was an interesting session and also great sharing my work and the things around India and how we are addressing climate change and how we could move forward.
What an interesting episode. Today we talked about advocacy, government policies, and participation from civil society with John Paul Jose of India. Let us know your thoughts about this episode in the comments or through our social media. We'd love to start a discussion with you about today's episode. In our next episode, we talk to Joseph Danladi from Nigeria about reducing carbon emissions, so keep your ears peeled for that. You can subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, YouTube, and SoundCloud. Follow our Instagram at cut.thecarbon, our Blue Sky at cutthecarbon.bsky.social, and our LinkedIn Cut the Carbon. Visit our website cutthecarbon.eco to learn more about us. Thank you for tuning in. Never forget that the climate crisis isn't fought alone or through only one way. Bye! See you next time!